So this video is for AQA Business Year 2 and Unit 3.8.2. So the unit is based on strategic positioning, whereas how a business places itself in the market in relation to competitors in the same market. And this specific video will be based on Porter's generic strategies. So in 1985, Michael Porter created his generic strategies, which focused upon ways for organisations to achieve a competitive advantage. It was set out in his book, Competitive Advantage, Creating, Sustaining, Super Performance. And he set out 4 positions to place yourself, which, if executed, would enable that competitive advantage. He also highlighted an unprofitable position, which I'll consider soon. So, the positions were dependent on the type of market you were operated in. So, breaking it down into a narrow or a niche market and a mass or a broad market. And you had these key positions which you could focus on in your strategy. One being cost and the other being differentiation. Now, stuck in the middle was not recommended, as that suggests you are in no man's land and not focus on any specific area, and therefore you're not going to maximise the returns and it'll confuse strategy. So, what do we mean by a niche and mass market? Or what do we mean by a broad and narrow market? So it's important to recognise the differences between a mass and a niche market. And Kotler defined the differences as the following. Niche marketing involves targeting a specialist area of the market, whilst mass marketing is typified by a product or production orientated business which uses shotgun marketing techniques and tactics rather than more precise targeted activities. So in other words, mass market is going to target a much greater customer base. So, to begin with, let's focus on cost. So when considering cost, it's strategies which enables a firm to be more cost effective and efficient. Often students mistake cost for price, but it's absolutely crucial that your first consideration in this theory is always cost. So for some firms, it'll be easier to tackle than others. For example, if a business has a size at their advantage, then they might find it easier to be in a position to cut costs and find those cost advantages. So example, those operating in a mass market, targeting a significant customer base, and therefore have high output, it'll be easier for them to achieve economies of scale. So just a reminder, economies of scale is, in the long run, firms due to their size can achieve a reduction in average total costs when they grow and increase output. So their unit costs will fall. So how can they do this? We'll break it down. Have you got a case study? Because it might provide you with clues. Or if no case study, then what real life examples have you found? Make sure that you have those examples to hand. So there are many types of internal economies of scale a firm can achieve, from technical, with the acquisition of capital to enhance productivity, to purchasing and increasing bargaining power to demand bulk discounts, risk-bearing and being able to spread risk over many industries and products. There's financial, and again, to do bargaining power and accessing more favourable credit terms. Or maybe there's marketing and the ability to increase exposure via more cost-effective marketing tools. And there's even managerial in terms of the specialised workers. But do not forget Year 12 content as well. So for example, lean production techniques, trying to eradicate waste. Think of examples of Toyota. Yes, not a UK firm, but there are other examples, and how every aspect of their operations is lean, embedding Kaizen into their day-to-day work. Now, the reason why I mentioned a UK firm is because we're going to have a look at a 25-mark question soon, and that is based on a UK firm. But perhaps it's reducing waste of capacity as well, or ensuring capacity utilisation is healthy. Whatever the strategy, it will allow for greater profit margins and more flexibility. So that flexibility can translate into lower prices if the firm opts to do so. And obviously, the greater your profit margins, the greater the investment the business can make in the future. Right, so the other method, differentiation. And this is considering ways to stand out. Make your offerings unique. Whether that is the experience of the service or the experience of using the good, the business is able to add value by enhancing quality. Maybe it's developing new features and functions via product development. Maybe it's finding a gap in the market. And ultimately, what you're doing is meeting customer needs better than your rivals. So in doing so, it'll be perceived as better value for customers, and they'll be attracted by the unique selling point of the business. So that should increase customer trial and customer retention, but also It also provides you flexibility with price as well, because if you are seen to be high quality, that you're unique, then you can carry out pricing strategies which again going to maximise your margin. So for example, price skimming.
So I thought what we could do is look at a 25 mark AQA question based on Porter's generic strategies. Now, the question itself doesn't mention Porter, but it does mention two of the key positions, strategic positions of Porter, which is low cost and differentiation. Now, the question focuses on a competitive advantage, and obviously that is what Porter is trying to achieve via these strategic positions. But when I looked at this question initially, I didn't realise the challenges of the question, and it was only once I properly broke down the question when I realised how challenging it actually is. And I suppose that's a piece of advice as well. Make sure that you spend time breaking down the question, reading it more than once, and really understanding what the question is asking, because otherwise that's going to be the most punishing thing that can happen to you in an exam if you misinterpret the question. And this question is not about which one's easier to do, it's which one's easier to maintain, and that maintain makes it challenging. And that is something that I can imagine a lot of students maybe neglect. So it also is a UK business, that's the context. So try to avoid using international companies that are operating all over the world, including the UK. Try and, if you can't think of specific UK businesses, which I'm hoping you can at this stage of the course or by the summer, think about the UK economy itself and the UK businesses which are created in the UK to obviously operate in the UK, and maybe you can consider application there. And I'll give you some examples in this model answer. So, level 5, 21 to 25 marks. And what is an excellent response? Okay, well, an excellent response is fully focused on the key demands. So that's easy to maintain, UK business, differentiation, and cost to achieve competitive advantage. It demonstrates a depth and range of knowledge, so it has to be precise. If there's inaccuracies, it's going to obviously limit your level. Analysis throughout, but that analysis is well developed. There's no incomplete chains of analysis, and it has to offer balance. So you have to obviously analyze both positions and both strategies. It makes judgments or provides solutions, and I would massively just put weight on in terms of the question as a whole throughout. I'd be evaluating throughout my answer. So my introduction, just a quick couple of sentences just to kind of make sure that I focus on what in terms of what I'm actually answering, and I've just said what a competitive advantage is. So that just brings it to my attention that I have to keep referring back to a competitive advantage, and that is achieving a favourable position over rival companies. So it allows a firm to determine whether their profitability is above or below the industry average. Then I've gone over Porter's generic strategies. I've not gone too much into depth on it because obviously the question isn't actually focused fully on that, but it mentions two of their main strategic positions, which is cost and differentiation. So I have highlighted that. Then I go into my first point, and what I've done is I've highlighted in red that aspect of the question in terms of easier to maintain. So what I've said, and again, feel free to pause this video and especially on each slide just to give it a quick read, but differentiation strategies, what are they? Well, they seek to be unique in its industry, attracting customers due to their creative ways in achieving customer needs. So a UK business might look to develop products in identifying ever-changing customer needs. Now, again, I've highlighted ever-changing because I'm looking at if you are successful at product development, it's not a one-off. It's not a one-off development. If your company revolves itself around the strategy of product development, you are always constantly searching for what the next customer need is, or you're identifying what customer needs will be in the future. So again, I've talked about the product development process, and I've looked at a UK company, and I've mentioned Dyson, which Dyson have a very, very successful brand image, which is known for innovation. And again, a brand image, it's not easy to create overnight. It does take years, and they've managed to do it because of their successful products that they've developed. It's as soon as they've got that brand image, and as soon as they are known for innovation, then of course it's going to make it easier to maintain. So by customers always perceiving your goods as high quality, and I think this is the key here, is just your language, how certain phrases that you can use, which just links it back to the demands of the question. And again, due to the anticipation of their new products. So the customer is always anticipating what Dyson is going to bring out next. And those, for example, early adopters are going to want to buy their products as soon as they're released. And then I've said about how it can move on to the next product developments, allowing the process to be continuous. But I do need to do a counter argument to that, and I need to start evaluating that point as well. So I've said, actually, it does have its challenges, and it does require capital. It's expensive. Dice have invested billions. And of course, as technology evolves and as customer needs evolve, then maybe the capital goods required also will evolve, and therefore future and continuous investment might be needed in them. I've also said about, actually, if it's all well and good Dyson developing these new products, but if they don't get intellectual protection in terms of a patent, then it's pointless, because then it's just shared by all companies in the market, so you won't be able to maintain that competitiveness. And then I've also said about the UK, we know that the UK, Jeremy Hunt said this the other day, the UK economy is now entered a recession. You could talk about income elasticity of demand within that, because actually that might make it harder to maintain, because if your good is a normal good, then we know that as income rises, quantity demanded will fall. So that might mean that it doesn't matter in terms of what you do to the product. It might help make it price inelastic to a certain extent, but if external factors are at play, then it might be really hard to maintain. So then I've just done like a quick a small, very little paragraph, couple of sentences, just to kind of give an evaluation in terms of, ultimately, once a brand name differentiation is achieved, it's easy to maintain competitiveness. And the reason why I'm doing this is just kind of linking back to the question, making sure I'm actually answering what the question's asking. I said, as long as there's no disruptive external factors, but businesses will have the experience and the capital to develop new differentiators, which should help sustain their competitive advantage. So now I need my balance, and I'll need to look at cost. So again, I've put, if a firm can achieve greater economies of scale, and you might question, why have I highlighted greater? Because what I could have done is I could have just said, if a firm can achieve economies of scale. But again, that's not to do with maintaining. We're looking at if a firm can achieve greater economies of scale. So once they've achieved economies of scale, they continue to try to reduce that unit cost. So if they can increase output and reduce their average total costs continuously, then a business can afford to lower prices and create barriers to entry. So again, thought about a UK firm, and I've used Rolls-Royce PLC. They've invested heavily in technology, and this allows greater technical economies of scale over the long term. So again, that time scale there. Economies of scale is a long-term cost advantage anyway, but it also just links back to it being easy to maintain. So I've talked about Tesco's, and I've said about their bulk buying and their bargaining power, and that'll constantly enable cheaper cost of sales per unit compared to smaller rivals. And again, if they've got better cash flow, it can help to maintain their competitive advantage. So I'm trying to use the language mentioned in the question throughout. My counter argument, there's challenges. Obviously, again, it might require initial expenditure to actually be able to cut costs. Rolls-Royce have only been able to increase productivity because of their investment in capital, so you might have to increase costs to reduce costs. And again, there is always the threat of diseconomies of scale when a company looks to grow to cut their costs, because that actually might cause inefficiencies, which goes against what you're trying to achieve. And sometimes you can only have these cost-cutting advantages because of your power and your dominance in the market. So it might not be easy to maintain for all companies. It might not even be easier to achieve, but that wasn't what the question was asking. So again, another evaluative point, the strategy is often long-term. It might be easier for large firms in the mass market. Does it depend upon what they do because of the low costs? Of course it does, because if it's simply to provide dividends to shareholders, then that might not go towards a competitive advantage. Again, if they're not actually using the flexibility to get that competitive advantage, maybe, for example, reducing price, then you could argue what they're doing with the profits. So ultimately, once these are all achieved, then they're in an excellent position to maintain those cost advantages and use their experience to build on it. Right, so I've got my overall conclusion now. You have to remember, in a 25 market, 10 marks is just for evaluation. So it's really, really crucial that you do spend a lot of time on your judgment. So in judgment to the question, I believe that both strategies will have challenges to achieve and sustain. And again, that sustain is the key aspect of the question. But UK firms, they have a luxury of having a stable and consumer-driven economy. I know they're in a recession now, but it's still, over time, last 10, 20 years, it's been mostly stable. Whereas differentiation would be attractive to customers, but also having access to skill and technology to reduce costs. So they could actually do both, but I'm not going to go into that because that's Porter's in the middle, no man's land, and I'm not exploring that. But I have looked at certain strategies. So some industries require a specific strategy. So if you think about an industry that's a creative industry, then differentiation is absolutely essential, and the nature of their existence requires that development. And again, I've said if companies are established, then maybe cost advantages might be easy to sustain compared to maybe a startup company or a company in an infant industry that just needs nurturing and needs growing, and they might not have the opportunity for those cost advantages.